Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to get started here, and people wander in, we'll let them join in and share in the fun. I'm Paul Treadwell, for those of you who don't know me, and sitting next to me is my co-host.
I'm Katie Baildon.
And together we have started the Extension Out Loud podcast. It's been running for about 9 months now. And we're going to build on some of the experience that we've learned over those 9 months and talk about some of the podcasting essentials. So that's today's session. If you're not wanting to hear about podcasting, you should probably head on to a different session. But if this is what you signed up for, welcome, and we're really looking forward to this. As I said in the chat box, 2 things. If you haven't seen Meatballs, you really need to watch it. And if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to toss them in the chat box. We'll take them. We're interruptible, and we'll all get more out of it if we have a back and forth. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie to get it started.
All right, can I have that?
You can have that.
All right. So, you already said this, but this is the logo for Extension Out Loud, the podcast that Paul and I co-host. And we already also said this, but we'll be looking at what we've learned from hosting Extension Out Loud, including some of the identifying audience and scope of the podcast, and some of the technology. Paul will discuss that later on. So I thought we'd kick it off with some statistics. So this is a survey that was done earlier this year of a U.S. population of adult or 12-plus-year-olds. And it really highlights that most people know what podcasts are. About half of us have listened. About a third of us have listened in the past month. And a little under a quarter of us listen regularly. And those of us that listen regularly average about 7 podcast episodes a week. So that's a pretty significant number of people that are listening, over 60 million regular listeners. So it really highlights that we have this captive audience of people who are already tuning into podcasts and maybe looking to diversify what they're listening to.
And with Extension Out Loud, we're really targeting that 12 to 14-year-old range. That's our target demographic, right?
No, I know. I'll talk about that in a second. But another thing that's not on this slide to note is that there are more and more people listening to podcasts and more podcasts coming to the market every year. So the survey that I found, it did highlight the change over time, and it really, podcast listenership has been going up significantly in the past few years.
And we realized about a year ago that Cornell Cooperative Extension didn't have any presence in that space, and so that's the motivation for starting out with Extension Out Loud. Podcasts have been around for about a decade now, but they've really seen a resurgence in the past year or two, and we just wanted to jump into that space. And I assume you guys are here because you realize that it is a large space, and we have a lot that we could offer as podcasts to our stakeholders, our audience, our clientele.
Right, and I suppose we should clarify too that this particular presentation, we're focusing on audio podcasts. I know some people in the system do a lot of video work, video podcasting, things like that, but this is really focused on audio podcasting. And although I think you said there weren't any when we started, I think there are a couple. And,
okay.
And there are some people that are already doing it in the system, so there's other people.
Fine. In our own little egocentric, in my own little egocentric way, there were none, so we had to do one.
All right, so I want to start off talking about audience identification. So this little quote is from an online training that I took that's free at lynda.com if you're interested in it. But the person that put this training together really emphasized the importance of identifying your audience first, which is something that Paul and I really struggled at. Because initially it was like, well, our audience is everyone. Everyone should listen to us.
I still believe that.
Yeah, Paul still thinks that. But the problem with that is that if you want to measure or see if you're meeting your mark or reaching the people you're trying to reach, you have to know who those people are. So this is a key first step in doing that. And this is a strategy that's used in a lot of different content development and web development. And it's really just to create a profile of your ideal listener or listeners. And you can get really into this and have, images of people, fake people or real people, and kind of just develop this character that you want to reach with your podcast. So think about age, gender, career, what they like, what they do with their free time, how they spend their time online, what they might be doing while they're listening to your podcast, and things like that. But be realistic and think about who's listening to podcasts already. So, if you're trying to target like a particularly like elderly generation, perhaps not listening to podcasts already, so that might not profile that you want to target. So think about those kind of things. All right, so moving on from that, picking a title, another key thing to do. So it's important with your title, you can be creative, but it should be descriptive of what you're going to be talking about in your podcast or what the theme of your podcast is. So there's a few reasons for that. One is because if someone stumbles across the title, it's good for them to know what it's going to be about. And also search engines will, it'll be helpful for them to find your podcast for people that are searching for information on a subject if you use that subject in your title. And the same goes for your episode. So again, if your episode is on, dairy farming, you'll want to put dairy in your title so that people are able to find the episode easily. And don't include the podcast author in your podcast title. So what that means is, for example, we wouldn't say Extension Out Loud, a podcast by Cornell Cooperative Extension. The Cornell Cooperative Extension part is the author, and the reason you don't need to include that is because any podcast directory will have that as a separate field. And then similarly for the episode, you don't need to include the name of your podcast in your episode title. So if it's interview with Paul Treadwell on Extension Out Loud, you can cut off the on Extension Out Loud part because it's again redundant.
So we have a couple questions here. We have one question here. Who else in the system is doing video podcasts? That's a good question. We'll identify those folks and we'll post those links once we identify both video podcasts and other podcasts in the system. We'll post those to the resource section for this session. So that'll all be there.
Another place to find them is on the Cooperative Extension website. If you go to multimedia.cce.cornell.edu, we have a bunch of audio and video resources that have been produced across the system that are highlighted there. The first one that jumps to mind is the Lake Erie Regional Grape Program. They do a weekly, I think it's weekly video podcast, and that's definitely worth checking out if you haven't seen it before.
And in the audio world, Ethan Grunberg from the...
Yep, he just started one.
So, and you can find Ethan's podcast. If you go to our SoundCloud page, you'll be able to find it there as well. It's linked on the right. Sorry.
All right.
So is the pace okay? Are we going too slow, too fast? Everybody still connected and listening? Okay, well, somebody is good. All right. We'll just keep rolling along.
Okay. And selecting a format. So we do an interview style podcast. That's kind of a typical podcast style where there's a couple hosts, they have a guest, have some kind of pre-prepared questions for that guest that really tease out some of the qualities of that guest and whatever they're passionate about or an expert on. So for example, for our podcast, we try to keep our episodes aligned with the season. So we will select guests who are really in the middle of their work,
yeah.
Which can sometimes be hard. But so that's what an interview style podcast is. You may have heard of solo podcasts where it's just kind of one person going on a long spiel about something. And that's another style. Storytelling is a little bit more involved and probably involves a lot more planning, but that's another interesting style. Something like This American Life is a popular radio show, but also podcast that uses the storytelling style. And then conversational, which we try to be a little conversational, but we're a little bit more structured, I think, than a strict conversational style. But it's kind of a less formal. There may or may not be a host. Just a kind of a conversation, usually around a specific topic, but with no real structure. So those are some of the different kinds. If you're interested in doing an interview style podcast and want to talk more about that, Paul and I are happy to chat about that with any of you. All right, and length. So this is another thing that we have struggled with a little bit, figuring out what the correct length is, and I think the answer is that there isn't really a correct length. We decided on 20 minutes just because that's kind of the length that we like listening to ourselves, I think. So at least to start off, I think it makes sense to pick a target length and try to stick to it. But once you have built an audience and you have some people you can get feedback from, it's a good idea to check in and say, is it long enough? Do you want it to be shorter? And then you can adjust as you go along to meet the needs.
I can just jump in here. We started out with a target of around 20 minutes. The last few episodes we've recorded, there's trending more towards half an hour. And I think that's the result of us developing a style and understanding how to get the answers we want and need from our interviewees. And it's just a comfort level with the technology and developing a sense of presence. It does take time. You're not going to go, most of us won't go right out of the gate and have the perfect podcast. It does take time.
Yeah, and some of us like to hear ourselves talk.
Some of us would prefer the podcast for a solo podcast, but couldn't have our way with that one.
So your podcast description is another key element. All of the different podcast hosting platforms have an area for you to describe your podcast. And we'll talk a little bit more in a moment about podcast feeds and how the title and author and description are fed into different platforms. But whatever your host platform is, be sure to include a description. This is something that we actually just did recently, but it's a good idea to have, give people an idea of who they're listening to. So names are great. And what kind of the theme of your overall podcast is and what some of the specific topics you cover are. Again, that helps with search engine optimization so people can, if they're Googling nutrition, they might stumble upon this podcast because we have the word nutrition in our description. And it also helps people to describe the podcast. If they're sharing it with their friends, they can say, oh, listen to this great podcast, and then they can actually just share the description or use it and if they're writing a story about your podcast. So it's a good idea to have that there for people to reference.
So one thing, if you're tagging your podcast like you should be, and if we did a podcast that was about nutrition, we would tag it nutrition, and nutrition is also in the description. So echoing the words that you're using just increases its findability with search engines because they're all indexed, and the more terms that are similar, the higher it's going to go in the rankings. So it's a good way to, when you're starting to describe your podcast or create keywords, to go back to your overall description and find out if you can use some of those categorical keywords as well. Right,
and so for SoundCloud, for instance, you can tag directly in your description. And I'm not super sure if the other platforms. So SoundCloud is our hosting platform. If we share it with other platforms, I'm not sure if it takes the keywords. Some of them ask you again for, they call them themes or genres. Sort of the same thing as keywords or tags. So just be sure you don't skip that field, whatever it's called, because it can be really helpful.
And we have a hosting question. We'll get to that in just a few minutes.
Right. Podcast artwork. So I just took a little screenshot of the homepage of Apple Podcasts, it's called now. And you can see there, a lot of them are colorful. They're all featured in the square layout, which is pretty standard with the exception of SoundCloud, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And Apple, I included the requirements for Apple because it's very specific. Their photo requirements are very specific, and it's the largest podcast directory, so you definitely want to get your podcast on Apple Podcasts. We'll talk about some other options, some other platforms as well in a minute. Another recommendation is to use the CCE branding fonts and colors, and that just helps to further our brand and to help people identify the podcast as part of CCE. So episode artwork is another option. It's not always displayed depending on what type of podcast player you're using. We're really fortunate that we, work with RJ Anderson, who's an excellent photographer and takes a lot of images to go with our episodes. But this is a completely optional thing. If it's just another set of steps for you, it doesn't add a whole lot other than a little bit of design. So that's also an option. And then I wanted to show you just quickly how all of these elements that I've talked about so far are displaying on a few of the most common platforms. So this is what SoundCloud looks like. As you can see, it's a circle icon, so it's a little bit different than all the other ones that I've seen, but most of them are using that square layout. And your description will show in one of the areas. And then you can see here too how the name of the podcast and the author of the podcast are shown on each of these platforms. So the name being Extension Out Loud and the author being Cornell Cooperative Extension. And I think one other thing that I think I had in the slide, but I didn't say out loud is, so for the episode title, we've opted to include Season 3, Episode 2, so the S3, E2. That's another thing that's completely optional. It doesn't particularly add anything as far as search engine optimization or anything like that. We just kind of liked it because it allows us to sort of see where we are, but it's definitely not a standard that you need to follow at all. Just the episode title itself is great. And another thing to note is that a lot of these sites also have some kind of numbering that might not align with yours. So just something to think about. Okay, so now we're going to switch over to talking about hosting. So as I've mentioned, we host on SoundCloud because it's free. There are other hosting platforms, but this one has been useful to us, so we definitely would recommend it. And then once you want to share your feed, so an RSS feed is how podcasts are populated on SoundCloud and on other podcasting hosts. And basically, you can just take the RSS feed. It's like a little URL that you copy, and any other platform that you want to share your podcast with, you just copy that RSS feed and paste it into their submission form. And so I've linked to the submission forms for Apple Podcasts, TuneIn Radio, Google Play, and Spotify.
One that we forgot to add is Stitcher.
I think.
Do we have that on
I
there
think
somewhere?
TuneIn, one of them goes to Stitcher, I think.
Really? Okay.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
We did do Stitcher.
It gets a little bit.
Yeah.
There are a lot of places out there that you can throw your podcast, and I think the more you can put it on, the better.
Yeah. Some of them feed each other. So if you get these main ones, it'll feed into, like I use, I think, Pocket Cast. I think
Yeah.
that's what it's called. And I think Google Play feeds that.
Okay.
So, there's a bunch of different apps that you can download on your phone or whatever you use to listen to podcasts. And it'll probably be populated by one of these main directories.
So I think our recommendation to get started is, if you're just starting out, you're getting your feet wet in podcasting, is to set up an account on SoundCloud. Now, it is free to set up the initial account, but if you're going to start producing a lot of podcasts, then you want to look at a subscription, which is going to give you a few more capabilities and also increase the amount of hosting that you can do on the platform. But to get started, you don't need to pay anything. You can use SoundCloud, and then SoundCloud can be fed to all the other ones. And that will be a relatively low bar to entering into the world of podcasting as far as hosting.
Mm-hmm. And each of these different podcast directories or platforms have slightly different requirements for submitting your podcast, but they all have some variation of a submission form with a feed for you to paste in your RSS feed. Some of them require an email verification, and like we mentioned before, some of them ask for you to identify a genre or a theme or some keywords or tags. All right, to see.
How much does it cost roughly to post? Again, the cost of starting out, the cost to post to SoundCloud is $0. But if you're going to start, I can't remember what the size requirements are, but if you exceed a certain amount of storage space or a certain number of plays per month, then you're going to have a subscription. I think it's around $100 a year. That's what I want to say, but it's somewhere around there. But initially, to get started, it shouldn't cost you anything other than your time.
Right. Okay, so once you have your podcast up, you have to let people know it's there. So a couple of recommendations. One is to have a page on your existing website that's dedicated to your podcast. Another option, which is what we've decided to go for, is for it to have its own web page or website. We're going to be using the new CCE blog template to host our podcast, or to feature our podcast. We're still in the process of putting that together right now, but we'll share that when it's up. And there are a few reasons for this. One, which I'll get into more in a moment, is that it allows for you to have a kind of a one-stop spot so that you can track who's coming there. But it also allows you to easily direct people to your podcast. So while you're recording your podcast, be sure to mention the URL so that people can find this page or site. You can also embed players. So SoundCloud and I think most platforms allow you to grab a code and put it on your website so that people don't have to go to a new website to listen. They can just click play right on your website, which is a nice feature if you want, especially if you want to highlight your most recent episode or something like that. And then, as with any of the profiles, like the SoundCloud profile, you'll want to include the full description, names and images of hosts, and then a link to the main places where people go to access podcasts. So definitely would recommend linking to Google Play and Apple Podcasts. Spotify is really growing, so that's another good one to link to. Our whichever podcast you see kind of the most listens happening. And then if you want to drive people to social media, if that's going to be a way that you share information about your podcast, definitely include icons that link to your social media presence as well. So another thing that we have started but hasn't really taken off quite yet is a mailing list. So I'm sure a lot of you already have really great mailing list for your communities. So you kind of have an advantage here, but you can use that audience that you already have and share information about the podcast and any of the newsletters that you regularly put out. And you can also generate a unique mailing list or a section of your mailing list dedicated to people that are particularly interested in your podcast, and definitely give them an option to sign up by adding a link to the sign up form to your website. And then if you do decide to do a podcast specific mailing list, again, mention it during your recording. Let people know they can sign up and tell them where to sign up. And also, if you do this, please include Paul and I on your list.
We'd like to know.
Yeah.
As usual, Katie is taking most of the time.
Oh, I'm too long.
That's okay.
Sorry. I'll speed up. Okay. Sorry to kind of mention this, but promoting your podcast on social media, I would recommend using existing social media platforms that you already have, or accounts that you already have, since you already have an audience there. If you start to identify that you have a huge audience that's interested in just your podcast, then you can kind of section off and have your own Facebook for your podcast. But at least initially, I would definitely recommend using the platforms or the profiles that you already have, and tagging guests if they have professional accounts so that they can help promote the episode. It's a really good idea. Always try to post a new episode as soon as possible on social media to really keep things fresh. And you can also, behind the scenes, encourage other people to share your podcast as well. There's often people looking for content, so just sending off an email or knocking on your neighbor's door and having them share it is a good option. And of course, tag us so we can help amplify as well.
And use your episode keywords as tags as well.
Yeah, if you want to use hashtags.
Yes.
So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because, well, there's not a whole lot of information on data and analytics. It's pretty tricky. And the reason is that there's a lot of different platforms, a lot of different devices. People are accessing podcasts in a ton of different ways. So it's really kind of hard to track people. And so, for example, people may automatically download your episode. They may have their player set up to do that, but that doesn't mean that they actually listen to it. So it's a little bit hard to figure that kind of thing out. So I attended a session in a higher ed analytics conference, and the presenter recommended the top two, Podbean and Podtrack, as potential hosting platforms. They're both paid, and they were created specifically for podcasts, which is a little bit different than SoundCloud, which is just kind of for audio in general. So they tend to be a little bit easier to understand analytics, but they're still not perfect. They're still pretty vague. And then SoundCloud, as Paul mentioned, also has some paid features for analytics as well as hosting. And a couple of the other recommendations she had is that if you're looking at analytics, make sure that you look at them at the same time. So if you post your podcast at the same time every week, for example, 2 o'clock on Thursday, you might want to check Friday morning around the same time and record that so that you can see how it's progressed over time. And then, of course, check it after promotions to see if your promotions are working. A couple other options, like I mentioned before, if you have a one-stop web page or website for your podcast, you can use Google Analytics to track who's visiting that page or that website, and that'll give you a bit more information about who the people are, where they're coming from, how they're finding out about your podcast. Another, probably the best recommendation, is to create a listener survey and send it out to your listeners via your mailing list and also on your podcast website. And that'll allow people to give you direct feedback. Let people know that it exists while you're recording your podcast and how to find it. You can ask questions, any questions that you want to know the answer to. Try not to ask random questions that you don't really care what the answer is. Really try to keep it short and to the point, and get information that you want to have. And again, yeah, just ask people during your podcast recording, please take our listener survey, please sign up for our mailing list, and even if you want, you can give them an email address. Say, give us feedback at, CCE Communications or whatever your email address is.
Cool. So I just want to catch up with a couple questions. Somebody mentioned a video podcast and whether they should host it on Facebook or YouTube. My impulse would be to go to YouTube because it's a more open platform. It's also a Google product, so it's indexed heavily by Google. So I would start with YouTube, and you can embed YouTube videos in your Facebook page. So YouTube is kind of the hosting thing, and Katie's thinking about this. She might have a different opinion.
I think both.
She would put them both places. I would put them on YouTube and embed them. But
Facebook treats YouTube videos a little bit poorly because it's not their platform. So I don't know. My opinion would be both, but I see Paul's point too. YouTube is more robust. So.
All right. So let's see. That was one. We'll talk about time it takes to do a podcast in just a minute. Do you have a sample template survey you use?
Oh yeah, go back.
Go back?
Yeah.
I'm going to go back.
The listener survey there, you can see ours if you go to that link, and the slides are available in our staff learning course page, which we can put the link to that directly.
All right, what does it mean to embed on YouTube? Actually, YouTube is, so when I'm talking about embedding, I would host it on YouTube, and then when you click the share option on YouTube, it will give you another option to embed, and that gives you a code snippet that you can then drop into a post or a page. And that sort of buries that video on that other site, Facebook or wherever. And
for
then
Facebook, you just need the URL, but for a website, you would need the code.
Or a blog, yeah. And that makes it so that the clicks and the views are counted on the main platform, YouTube, so you don't have to worry about metrics in different places. So let's talk about some, and we'll catch up with any remaining questions in just a minute. Got to get rolling here because we're going to run out of time.
Sorry.
That's all right. So we've learned a few lessons. It does take time to both find your identity, identify your audience, and develop the process that you're going to be using. So you have to be patient and let the process happen. If you have 3 episodes out there and you're suddenly not burning up the world, that's okay. Go to 6 or 9 or 12, do whatever it takes, just give it time. If in the editing process especially, good enough is good enough. You can spend a lot of time cutting out every and pause and just drive yourself crazy. So you have to decide for your audience, for your identified audience, what is good enough quality-wise to be good enough, and settle on that. Don't strive for it perfect, because that will just drive you crazy. And provide transcripts of the episodes. So we've identified our audience and done all this good stuff, so let's talk about actually creating the content. You have your idea, you've fleshed it all out. The steps to doing that are recording, editing, mixing, exporting, and uploading. We'll go through those somewhat erratically and quickly. Somebody asked about the time. So for a 22-minute episode of Extension Out Loud, it takes about an hour or 2, potentially more, to prepare. So that's the research part and the developing questions. When we did our first episodes, we focused on the Farm Bill. Our first season was focused on the Farm Bill. We spent substantially more than 2 hours preparing for that, because there was a lot of background research on the Farm Bill that we needed to do so that we could talk intelligently with our guests. Half an hour to set up recording if you're doing any kind of elaborate setup that involves more than one microphone with you and your guests sharing that microphone. So give yourself a half an hour to get into the room that you're going to be recording in, to get set up, to get everything connected. Plan on an hour for recording time. Even if you're only going to end up with a 15-minute podcast, give yourself an hour so that you can do the interview, have it somewhat conversational, and find any interesting things that may be worth including in that 15-minute segment. It takes about 2 to 5 hours to edit an episode. That depends on how straightforward the interview, the episode is. So if it's a very much I'm going to ask a question and Katie's going to answer it, and I'm going to ask my next question and she's going to answer that, and it's going to be sequential, it's going to be on the lower end of editing. As soon as you start getting more conversational, as soon as you start exploring interesting ideas, editing becomes more challenging to try to figure out whether you want to include those, how you have to trim them down to make them fit with your time frame. So you can spend up to 5 hours to end up with a 22 or 25-minute episode if you want to. And then you have to actually produce it. So in your editing software, you've edited everything, you've put your music in and your end credits. Now you need to produce it, so that's going to take a little while, and then you need to upload it. That's going to take another little bit of time. So give it about an hour. That's just a rough time frame, and that is the time frame we're working on right about now, and that's after at least 6 months of doing podcasts. So it's going to be slower than that initially. It's going to take you more than 2 hours to edit. It's probably going to go up to that upper end if you're just learning the software and getting used to it, and you're doing something with multiple voices. Here's my forward thingy. Audio quality can vary wildly depending on how you capture your audio. Your target audience and the intent of your podcasts will set the level for acceptable audio quality. And if you have money to spend on gear, that's also going to be a limiting factor. If you don't have a budget and you only have your iPhone that you can record audio on, that is immediately going to set the bar for where your audio quality is going to be. It's never going to be higher than what that device can offer you. So if you have a budget for additional things like microphones, that's going to raise the bar on your audio quality. And there are a broad spectrum of options that are available. Microphone is your most important investment. Obtain the best one you can afford to buy at the time. If you buy a microphone with a USB interface, it really simplifies your life. The USB interface plugs the microphone directly into your computer, and then you can record straight into your digital audio platform. If you're using multiple microphones, you're going to need to invest in a mixer. We use Behringer. They make decent low-cost mixers. You can spend a lot of money on them, but we try not to spend a lot of money. And if your budget is really limited, I would still recommend coming up with $129 to buy the Blue Microphone Yeti. It's a good option for low budget capture. It's what we use for the first few episodes of Extension Out Loud. It lets you adjust the range of the microphone. So you can have guests sitting across from each other. You can do 360 sound. So if you have 3 guests, you can position them and the microphone will capture that. It's USB, so it pumps directly into the computer, and then you can edit the audio. So I see a couple questions, so I just want to pause and catch up on those.
Facebook Watch we haven't used, so we can't speak to that, unfortunately.
Good golly, that's something I hadn't even paid attention to. Okay, Facebook Watch, we got rid of that. What does it mean to embed on YouTube? Okay, they did that. Can you recommend a GoPro? I can recommend a GoPro depending on the context. So that's a conversation. If you want to email after the session, we can talk more about video capture options. GoPros are really problematic as far as I'm concerned, as far as audio quality. And then you get into dancing. If you're using a branded GoPro, then you have to buy their branded GoPro microphone dongle, which is a ridiculous amount of money. So email me and we can talk about that. So 1 day a week dedicated FTE for 1 episode. Without dedicated staff and equipment, can campus departments subcontract with you to create episodes? That's a really interesting question, Dana, that we'll have to investigate. We're going to sideline that. We're going to put it in the parking lot, and we'll get back to you with an answer on that. What is Facebook Watch? Katie, what is Facebook Watch?
I think it's like a TV sort of thing on Facebook. I've never watched Facebook Watch, so I don't think I'm the best person to answer.
Maybe we should get RJ in here and ask him about it, put him on the spot. We honestly can't offer an opinion on that. Sorry about that one. We have conducted interviews using Zoom to capture the audio. It's fairly easy to use. Audio quality can be a real issue. If your remote participant is connecting with a cell phone, if they're in a noisy background, it can be really problematic. So our general feeling is we'd like to avoid using that and doing remote podcasts, but sometimes you can't, you just have to. It also lacks the face-to-face interactions. So in our experience over the past 9 months is it's much more conversational, it's much more engaging to be in the same room with you, the person that you're interviewing. And Zoom just sort of abstracts that a little bit. And so we're not the greatest, I think I can safely say we're not the greatest fans of Zoom, but it is a necessary evil at moments. Editing, you have two options that I would recommend. If you're connected to Cornell, you have Adobe, which we'll talk about, but I use mostly Audacity. It's free open source audio software. It can do multi-track recording and editing, so you can have 3 or 4 microphones coming in, and each microphone is recorded as a separate track. That makes it editing easier. It exports multiple formats, so you can export MP3s or higher quality audio files that you can then upload. There are a large library of plugins that will allow you to clean up the audio, and it's fairly intuitive to learn and use. So Audacity, I'm a big advocate for, even though some people will say, well, you should be using Adobe. I like supporting free and open source projects, and so that's one of the main reasons I choose to use that. Oh, wait, Audition, we didn't talk about that. Audition is provided by Adobe. It's part of the Creative Suite. So if you have access to the Creative Suite, you have access to Adobe Audition. It's a comprehensive recording and editing software package. It does multi-track recording, multiple formats. It does have a steeper learning curve. There's something very intuitive about using Audacity that intuition is lost when you move to Audition. It can do a little bit more, probably a lot more if you really learn it well, than Audacity could do. But again, you go back to the quality and the amount of time you have to invest. And is it worth your investment of time to fractionally improve the quality of your audio for an audience that doesn't really care all that deeply? Unless you're targeting audio files, I wouldn't spend a lot of time learning how to use Audition. But it is supported by Cornell. So you have to make difficult choices when you edit. Some of us are in love with our own voices and questions. It's really hard to get Katie to focus. Well, she's not even paying attention. It's great. Editing requires you to make choices. So you end up, you sit down and you have a 15-minute target. You may have talked for 45 minutes. You have to sit down and listen to that audio and decide, is this section necessary for the episode focus? If this section is, I really like it because it adds a humanizing element, what do I have to drop that is going to lose some of the necessary information? And then there are things that as you listen to it after recording it, you'll immediately know that a listener will just say, what the hell were they talking about? And you can just cut that out. But it's hard to make some of those choices sometimes. And it really does take time to learn how to edit effectively, to know what is worth leaving in, what is taking out. So your first few episodes are going to be a little rocky, but that's okay. It's all part of the learning process. And it would also really help, in a perfect world, I would love for Katie and I to record the podcast and then give it to somebody else to edit. But we don't have the staff for that, and we don't live in that world. And I also know that if I did that, I would get very angry at the person editing it because they would cut out things that I would think are essential. So it's a very subjective kind of process, but you have to trust your judgment at a certain level.
We have 1 minute.
We have 1 minute left. All episodes of Extension Out Loud are transcribed. Transcripts are posted as PDFs and then linked. We farm out the process. We use a service called Rev. It costs $1 a minute. The cost also helps you focus the editing process. Somebody's volunteering to edit a podcast for us. If you know you're paying $1 a minute and you've got some extraneous stuff that you're on the fence about leaving in your podcast, it's going to tilt you a little more towards cutting that out because it costs you money. And now Katie's typing. Oh, thank you, Katie. And that should be linked somewhere. And our current setup in the last 30 seconds, we've been in production for less than a year. We've tried a number of different caption options. Zoom is problematic. Be prepared always with a backup plan. Right now, this is what we currently use in-house. We have our audio in this particular instance going into a Zoom H6 portable recorder. We have 4 Shure microphones. We have some microphone stands and a bunch of XLR cable. That is our setup. The recommended equipment, we're using these microphones. They cost $100 a pop. So out of the gate, if you have no budget, you're not going to go out and buy all these things. I would recommend you focus on grabbing a decent blue microphone, plugging that into whatever computer or laptop you have. And that is the room that we're in right now. I get very decorative when I want to do podcasts, so I pull the furniture out of here. We did one episode where we put a couch and some comfy chairs in here. It's very nice trying to set a mood. This recommended equipment list is available on the session page that you came to find the webinar link. And there are some resources that you can grab as well. And that's officially the end. We ended just about almost on time. Are there other questions we need to catch up on? Please share the screen. All right. We have a volunteer to edit our podcast. We'll keep track of you. Are there any other final questions before we kick you on your way?
Please, oh, sorry.
Hopefully you all learned a little bit about it, and then Katie's going to do a please thing.
Oh, please feel free to reach out to us with questions or to let us know about your podcast or anything.
Yeah, if you start producing or you're really starting to think about getting into it and you wonder about the gear, send us an email. We'll get you started with some recommendations. There are some ways you can snake around buying gear initially, but if you can come up with $129, it's going to make your quality just that much better. What physical location do you do your podcast in? Ideally, it's in 353, but we sometimes do it from my office if we're connecting remotely using Zoom. We're hoping to get more out into the world in the next season, so we'll be doing some field recording as well, so that'll be exciting.
All right, I think we have to.
We have to say goodbye. Please fill out the after-session survey. Let us know how we did. And again, contact us anytime with questions.